Is the U.S. preparing for a Pacific conflict? The short answer is yes, but not exclusively, or in a purely militaristic sense. The U.S. is not just preparing for a hypothetical hot war. It is engaged in a broad, long-term strategy of competition and deterrence, aimed at making conflict less likely by strengthening its position and its partners. This fuel facility is a single, but significant piece of that much larger puzzle. Here's a breakdown of the evidence and what it suggests. Strategic military preparedness, the obvious signal. The most direct interpretation of this project is as military logistics preparation. Fuel is the lifeblood of modern warfare. Navies and air forces consume vast quantities of fuel. A secure, large-scale storage facility, 1.6 million barrels, is substantial. In a strategic location like Port Moresby provides a crucial logistical node. Such a facility would allow the U.S. Navy and Air Force to operate, refuel, and sustain presence in the region for extended periods without relying solely on distant bases in Guam, Hawaii, or Japan. It effectively extends the range and endurance of U.S. forces. The fact that this is a Department of Defense project, announced by the Indo-Pacific Commander, Admiral Paparo, directly links it to military strategy, not just civilian aid. China has significantly increased its economic and political influence in the Pacific, including in PNG, through infrastructure loans and investments. The U.S. is responding by offering a high-value alternative partnership. A $400 million investment is a tangible demonstration that the U.S. is a reliable and committed partner, countering narratives that it has neglected the region. This is putting your money where your mouth is. The U.S. strategy is to create a resilient network of partners, Australia, Japan, PNG, Fiji, etc., rather than a simple hub-and-spoke model. Strengthening PNG enhances the entire network's capability. The construction of this fuel storage facility is a clear indicator that the U.S. is taking concrete steps to prepare for extended military operations in the Pacific theater, which is a fundamental aspect of preparing for potential conflict with a strategic competitor, i.e., China. However, to say the U.S. is only preparing for conflict is too narrow a view. A more accurate assessment is that the U.S. is executing a full-spectrum strategy of integrated deterrence, which includes military preparedness, 2. Strengthening allies and partners, 3. Economic statecraft, 4. Diplomatic engagement. In essence, the U.S. is preparing for competition by building leverage. This fuel facility is a tangible billion-kina brick in that foundation of deterrence.
A Department of Defense branch called the Defense Logistics Agency, or DLA. This office is responsible for procuring a variety of critical goods for the military, from MREs to aircraft parts. Through its sub-office DLA Energy, the agency buys all manner of fuel from suppliers, and the service branches reimburse them for what they order. As of 2021, the Air Force was by far the largest consumer of petroleum and aerospace energy, purchasing $4.5 billion in fuel. The Navy was the second largest at $2.7 billion, followed by the Army at $780 million and the Marine Corps at $31 million. For our scenario, DLA Energy supports the European region via its Europe and Africa office based in Germany. Downstream, logistics is split up by combatant commands. The US has 6 geographically based combatant commands that are responsible for all military forces in their areas of responsibility. In the case of war in Europe, the relevant one would be US European Command, or EUCOM. EUCOM has an associated Army service component called US Army Europe and Africa. The Army is legally responsible for managing overland petroleum supply to all US ground forces regardless of branch, in addition to coalition partners. The Army's service component reviews the fuel requests of its logistics commands. It then forwards these requests to EUCOM's Joint Petroleum Office, or JPO, which validates them and places the actual orders from DLA. Ideally, DLA Energy will try to procure fuel within theater from a host nation. Sourcing fuel from Kuwait's commercial refineries for forces operating in Iraq is a direct example. Failing this, and if there are no pre-positioned stocks of fuel or pre-established fuel terminals in the area of operations, DLA might have to coordinate a mass sea lift of fuel. Sealift is the most cost-efficient way of moving loads of fuel around the world, but it's also relatively slow, taking weeks to get fuel in theater. This would be executed by the Military Sealift Command, or MSC. When they arrive in a new theater, the fuel tankers offload into the Offshore Petroleum Discharge System, which includes an auxiliary ship and an Onshore Beach Terminal Unit, or BTU. In undeveloped theaters lacking port infrastructure, the two are connected via a mooring buoy and up to 8 miles of flexible hose line. Once fuel is on the output side of the BTU, the Army takes over responsibility for moving the fuel. In the case of Europe, there's a significant amount of NATO infrastructure already on the continent for delivering fuel from storage depots to the front, a byproduct of the Cold War. This includes the NATO pipeline system spanning Europe, comprising 10,000 kilometers of pipe and a storage capacity of nearly 1.1 billion gallons of fuel and lubricants. However, if infrastructure is lacking, the Army can lay its own pipe. Large, permanent pipelines are the most efficient overland means of transporting fuel. Rail is also an option for bulk petroleum, but both options lack flexibility for lower-level distribution, which is made up for by vehicles and temporary pipelines. By contrast, in particularly austere and remote environments, the Air Force might be required to airlift fuel into theater. For example, if an airborne force has seized an airfield far away from the more capable fuel facilities. As another example, the Marine Corps has its tactical bulk fuel delivery system mounted in CH-53 helicopters for delivering up to 2,400 gallons of fuel directly to forward combat vehicles.